There are many people and groups that have come together to make tonight's program possible. Tonight truly is a result of a community-wide effort. I'd like to start by introducing the Coalition Coordinator for Newcastle United for Youth, David Johns. David, will you wave to everybody? The Coalition is the driving force behind this evening's program, but there are many important people that are co-sponsors that we want to thank. Chappaqua Central School District, including Robert Rhodes, our principal. The Town of Newcastle, including Rob Greenstein, our Town Supervisor. The Always Supportive PTA, and Northern Westchester Hospital, including Dr. Stumacher. I'd like to share Dr. Stumacher's bio with you. Dr. Richard Stumacher is a triple board certified internal medicine, pulmonary medicine, and critical care medicine specialist who joined Northern Westchester Hospital in 2015. He currently serves as the Chief of Pulmonary and Critical Care Division, Medical Director of the Step Down Unit, and Perioperative Consultative Services. Prior to his employment at Northern Westchester Hospital, Dr. Stumacher spent 13 years as faculty of the St. Barnabas Hospital in the Bronx. In addition to full-time clinical responsibilities and various administrative roles, Dr. Stumacher was tasked with making St. Barnabas Hospital smoke-free campus. In 2008, he created and implemented policy, provided smoking cessation for employees, and created and ran a smoking cessation clinic in English and Spanish until his departure. Dr. Stumacher continues to provide smoking cessation at Northern Westchester Hospital's smoking cessation program. We're very lucky to have him share his expertise with us this evening. And Rob Greenstein. Rob is Newcastle Town Supervisor. This is his third term as our supervisor. He's a great supporter of the work of Newcastle United for Youth. We're lucky to have his support and his backing. And he is also the parent of 3 Greeley students. So that's our program this evening. Mr. Rhodes is going to start us off, followed by Dr. Stumacher, and then Rob Greenstein. At the end of that, I'm going to bring Dr. Stumacher back up to do some question and answer. And Mr. Rhodes and I will be in the lobby with some of the devices that some have been confiscated from students and some that we borrowed that are never used, so that you have an opportunity to actually look at them and to familiarize yourself with what some of these things look like. So please join me in welcoming Robert Rhodes.
Thank you. I realized tonight, much to my chagrin, I really have to work on my board skills. Your students do these amazing presentations all the time, and I'm up with my Scotch tape trying to put stuff on the board so it doesn't roll around. But we do want you to see, and if you can't see now, you can come out afterwards and see up close what to look for. Some of the smaller items too, if you're finding them around. That's not good, but you'll have more information tonight, and you can think about next steps. Okay. I just want to give a little context before we invite the doctor up. What we're really looking at is a national problem. This has been well documented by the Surgeon General and other places that the country's really successfully cut down on teen cigarette use, which is great because teens that start tend to have a lifetime pattern of habitually either getting in or out or staying in, which leads to all kinds of other health problems. What's happened since then is that while we've done a great job at discouraging teenagers from becoming involved with tobacco, e-cigarettes have really taken off and increased 900% in the same time. Editorializing here, I think it has a large part to do with how they're marketed. There's different styles, it's technology, there's different colors, it's cool, it's safe, it's customizable. So I think that's sort of interesting in the marketing world, but it's also bad news for kids. All right. One more thing I'll just add there. So even when I go to monthly, there's different groups of principals get together. Someone always has a recent story about how they're dealing with it in their school, or some crazy thing a student tried to do, like vaping in class, or some way they tried to spike a cartridge or something. So it's not just here in Chappaqua, it's in the surrounding districts as well. Everybody has this problem. There have been letters that have been going out regularly from different principals. I've got a small collection now. It's something we're all dealing with, but we want to try to help you tonight think about how you can talk with your sons and daughters about this. All right. So, as I said, teens have abandoned traditional nicotine. Marketing has changed. It's a new way to introduce. On the school side, some of the challenges are, with vaping, unlike with traditional cigarettes, medically it doesn't present the same way. The pupils don't dilate, you don't get the same smell. Someone could take a puff on a vape and it could be gone in 20 seconds, you wouldn't smell anything, you wouldn't see anything. All the old ways, you think about schools following up, did you smoke something? Let me smell your jacket. Things like that just doesn't work anymore. We're on the wrong side of it. The technology and how the combustion works with the vapor is just very different. Although the challenge here is that the health impact is similar, and I think for a number of years students really haven't believed that, and science is much slower than marketing and technology. But I think the doctor's going to talk with you tonight is about how the scientific data points are collecting in the same space that it really is unhealthy. In some ways more unhealthy because you don't know what's in the cartridges or how people are customizing what's happening with the technology. All right. Couple things about the school. So as a school, we know it's a problem. Students talk to us about it. Parents talk to us about it. We've done a number of different things. There are very literal district policies in place around possessing e-cigarettes or vaping materials or any cigarettes on campus. There's state law. There's district policy. It's not allowed. There's no reason you should have it on campus. There's nothing you would do with it here. If we find somebody in possession or using, we will suspend them. Because we really don't want it here, and it's become a problem. It's become a nuisance to other students who feel like that some bathrooms aren't accessible to them, and there's no reason that you should have it during the school day. So even so far this year, our suspensions are up 100%. So it wasn't hard to go in the confiscation drawer and just pull things out and put them up there. And really, that to me is a sign of concern. One, because I don't think we're going to necessarily police our way out of it. I'll say more about that in a minute. Also, if students can go into a bathroom and take a puff and the smoke disappears in 30 seconds, that means if we're just randomly catching people, if you think about there's 15 or 20, I don't even know exactly how many bathrooms here in the high school, and we randomly walk in and catch somebody, if you divide it into the dots of the day, 1 minute each bathroom, there's a lot of minutes, there's a lot of dots on that board, but we still are finding people. Other times, friends are concerned about their friends and they're turning people in. But we'll talk a little bit more about that, and the school has a slightly different role in that case. We did a faculty training where we showed faculty some videos. Faculty got to see a lot of the same items you are, so they can recognize it in class. Some of the things look like thumb drives, so you might not recognize it otherwise, and that has helped us increase patrolling the building a little bit. And now we're trying to disseminate information to you as well and talking to students about it. We also put up some posters in the bathroom that we made ourselves. We're not as slick or talented as marketers that are out there, but we did want to try to put information in the bathroom and tape it up every few days, just to give you an example of what we're trying to show students. While part of my role is to police what's happening, really what I'm most worried about is the health concern for students. And the school also has very much a health approach, and that's not always my role, but there are people who have that role, like Carolyn. And so our belief is that we have a core of students, not a large number, but enough, they're already addicted. They've been using e-cigarettes for enough time that part of the reason they're bringing it into school is they can't not go and try to take a hit or get some nicotine or spike it with something else. And then what's happening is they're socializing that out to other students, like, oh, you should try this, or don't you think this would be fun? Sort of like all the peer pressure movies we saw when we were in high school, but it's a little more sophisticated with the technology now. And we hear that story. Some of the students that have been in disciplinary trouble are students that's very clear they're addicted, their parents are struggling with that with the students, and others are students who got some attention or were able to join different social groups and got caught and are just beside themselves, as are their parents. My other concern there is just addressing the boundaries with the socialization. We want students to enjoy a lot of opportunities at the high school, and if students wanted to, I'm not advising it, go out and try an e-cigarette on the weekend or do something like that, we would never know, and it's not our business. Very, very concerned with students who are bringing it into school and trying it during school, because I think there's a whole other something that's going on there where it's not like there's a boundary here, this is school, I could get caught. I think they're doing it because there's another psychological transaction going on, and I don't want to spend a lot more time on it, but I'm worried about the judgment there as well. There is support for students. There's counselors. There's a student assistant counselor, Ms. D'Agostino. We have social workers. We also have outside referrals, and I say that because what we do want is we want students to try to make healthy choices. We want to help them do that. And some students will admit they're really struggling with what's happening. They're either feeling the pressure, or they tried it and they liked it and they're not sure what to do. Our services like that are really confidential. So if someone goes to Ms. D'Agostino, our counselor, and says, look, I tried these things, I'm not sure what to do, I know my parents would be really mad at me, she doesn't come to me and say, Mr. Rhodes, I've got to tell you this, you've got to search the student. She tries to help that student. So we've got that part, and I'm sure she also tells the students, if you're doing it in school, you're running the risk of getting caught, and if you're with Mr. Rhodes, or Ms. Stuback, or Ms. Stewart, or Mr. Hosier, I am not going to be able to help you at that point. I can help you with decisions, but if you're caught, these are some of the things you should think about. So the same people, you'll notice, are also parent supports. So if you feel like there's something going on you're struggling with, or you hear a friend talking about it when you're out and says, oh, I found these things, I don't know how to address it, you can go to Ms. D'Agostino. She's confidential. She'll meet with you. She won't do anything that you don't ask her to do, but she'll give you information and try to give you strategies to help you work through that, because we want to support you as parents as well. All right, so partnering and next steps. We're all in this together. I have my role. Unfortunately, it's a disciplinary role, but it's an important one because we do want students to feel like this is a safe place where they can go to school and use the bathrooms and not feel like they're pressured to do things they don't want to do. We also want to close the information gap. Hopefully, we're going to do that tonight, either by seeing the materials, hearing the doctor, talking to us afterwards. That while the science is slow, the data points are gathering, and they're all gathering in the same place. So this is not healthy for students. You can share information, as I mentioned, if you're talking to friends, if you're worried. Some of the things that happen with anonymous alerts, they're not disciplinary. Sometimes someone will say, I'm really worried about my friend so-and-so, and we will pass that information very quietly along to counselor and say, we'd really like you to have a conversation with this person. And sometimes that helps move things along. And then ask for help if you need it. This is my way of asking for help and also sharing the information we have. I've taken more than enough time. I'm supposed to be the movie trailer, not the main feature, so I'd like to invite the doctor up to speak now.
I believe my mother was smoking when I was in utero, and that's why I'm 5'7" and not. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me and for such a great turnout on a freezing cold Thursday night. Just to give you a little bit of background, at Northern Westchester Hospital, we have a junior President's Council. So it's a couple of high school students from each of the surrounding towns that all come to the hospital, and they learn about leadership. And one of the things they do is they take a health issue and they bring it back to their community, and they try and move the needle to some degree. This past year, they brought to Northern Westchester their concern about vaping. And no one at Northern Westchester even knew what was going on or what it was about. And so they said, well, who does this stuff? So while they're doing that, I'm going to, because I could get through a whole bunch of this without you guys having to look at any pictures. And the pictures I put up there are to entertain you and keep you awake anyway. So they tapped me and they said, hey, what do you know about vaping? And I said, a little bit. I think there are kids who are doing it, and one kid got busted at our school and got suspended. Then I started reading the literature and learning about it, and that's where I am today. I was invited by Pleasantville to speak to them when they had their vape shop opening up. And then I was invited by Nita Lowy for Superintendent's Council. I went to that meeting. And so it's kind of snowballed, and we've gotten to a point where here I am talking to you guys. While we're getting the AV stuff squared away, I do want to say this about the vaping. The problem with vaping and e-cigs is that there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of disinformation, and a lot of it is moving at an extremely rapid pace. This is moving viral, and it's kind of all combining at the same time to create a problem where everyone feels like they're behind the time. I'm very impressed with this meeting tonight. What your principal showed me is way advanced compared to any of the schools I've been to so far. I found that you have your town supervisor here already is, again, very, very advanced. I'm thrilled that I get to be a part of this. So, so the real problem is when people ask me about vaping, they want to know, is it good or bad? So the question is vaping healthy or is it harmful? And the government refers to it as electronic nicotine delivery system. I thought it was a very interesting choice of acronym because ENDS as in the ends of your life. And so there's a lot of ads and there's a lot of marketing going on that people don't know what vaping is about. This one is clearly vaping is not cigarettes, it's not poisonous, it's not conjoined twinned at the cheek, it's not a 1950s guy who's waiting for his martini. And yet, here's another image where it says, if you can do this but not get cancer, wouldn't you do it? Wouldn't you switch? We did, thank you. So it's a very powerful image, right? And then here's a converse image, which is they already grabbed the anti-smoking stuff with a patient with a toe tag that looks just like Marlboro cigarettes. And then on the bottom, it's of the next generation cigarette for the next generation of addicts. And that's where I want to leave you, is that I'm more worried about the addiction aspect of this. So the literature is at best somewhat confused. Here on the top we can see an article from 2015 in England that did a literature review, a meta-analysis that said that they believe that vaping is 95% safer than cigarette smoking. So everyone who's pro-vaping has taken this article and other articles that are supported by tobacco companies, etc., and say, look at how safe vaping is. And the one on the bottom is just a screen grab from our own CDC with, such just listen to the title, e-cigarettes in young people, a public health concern. So we could see how completely different it is. So where I want to pivot is I want to reframe the question. I am not worried at this point in time, and we'll get there, about whether or not vaping is safe or not. What I want to talk about is nicotine addiction. So everyone in this room knows what nicotine is. It comes from tobacco plants. It's highly addictive. It gets up into the brain in a few seconds. It affects the nucleus accumbens. It causes a series of chemical reactions, and you get a release of dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical in our brain that's responsible for pleasure. And it's an extremely highly addictive substance. It's all part of us. We all have nicotine in our own bodies right now. It's a normal neurotransmitter. We all have nicotinic receptors, and it does what it's supposed to do, but we're not supposed to get additional nicotine. And when we do, we have that dopamine release. And that's a problem for us because, and this, sorry, I stole this from my smoking slides because someone else made it and it's too hard for me to reproduce. So when you smoke and you take a puff of a cigarette, nicotine gets up to your brain in about 7 seconds, causes a series of reactions, and then eventually dopamine is released and you feel really good, pleasure, calm. And then in between cigarettes, your nicotine levels start to drop down, so your dopamine levels start to drop down, so you start to have nicotine withdrawal. And everyone's nicotine withdrawal is very different, and it depends on where they are during the course of the day, how anxious, upset, stressed, happy, drinking, what mood they're in. But either way, it creates a signal in your brain that says, I know how to feel better, just get me some more nicotine. Now, it isn't as direct as that, but then you bring more nicotine back into your brain, your dopamine levels feel better, and then you keep going around in this merry-go-round, and you can't get off this merry-go-round. But it's a little bit more insidious than that. So this is a slide of a study back in 1988, and the x-axis is time, the y-axis is the basal release of dopamine. If we look in the top right-hand corner, I don't know if this is gonna... I wrote a note to myself today to buy a laser pointer, finally. So in the top right corner, we could look at cocaine. If you ingest cocaine, within about 40 minutes to an hour and 20 minutes is where you get your highest peak of dopamine release. If you see at the very beginning, the first 20 minutes, it's almost a straight line up. So it's an excessive amount of dopamine release, it flattens off a little bit, it peaks, and then it kind of comes down slower in a curved aspect. It's almost like a crash, and then it kind of washes out over a long period of time. If you look at morphine in the bottom right, those are all different dosages. So even the highest one, the beige one, is 10 milligrams per kilogram. For any of the clinicians in the room, you'd know that's a pretty hefty dose. We don't even do that. And it's blunted. It's blunted on purpose. When they created morphine, they didn't want patients to get high and create too much of an addiction off of morphine. So if you see, it's very rounded and slow. It takes almost 2 hours before you get your highest release of dopamine. If you look at nicotine in the bottom left corner, you'll see within 10 to 20 minutes, you get almost a straight vertical line spike of dopamine. The only thing that works as well or as fast as that is amphetamines, methamphetamines, and crystal meth, but you see the release numbers are tremendous there, right? So that's mollies. But this is worse than that, because science researchers have looked at least for cigarette smokers, there's 20 cigarettes in a pack. If you're a pack-a-dayer, you take anywhere between 10 and 20 puffs off of a cigarette, depending on your stress. You're at work, you're hanging out, whatever. So if you think about it, between 200 and 400 times a day, you're hitting that, like that mouse in that commercial, you're hitting the pleasure button in your brain, the pleasure center button, 200 to 400 times every single day for 30 years, for 40 years. You create rewiring in your brain, you get a hardwired feedback mechanism, and you're stuck there. Nobody does 200 to 400 hits of crack or crystal meth, etc., because they would be dead in a couple of hours. And this is why nicotine is the most addictive substance that there is, and that's why it's so insidious. So 8-9 years I was in the Bronx, and all of my patients were ex-crack or ex-heroin or ex-alcohol or poly. And all of them, every single one of them told me that quitting cigarettes was much harder than getting off crack. That's how crazy nicotine is. That's how addictive nicotine is. So now we're going to move over towards nicotine and the adolescent brain. So nicotine affects the prefrontal cortex in the growing adolescent brain. I love this slide because it reminded me of my own lovely son. And so in this slide, I'm not so sure it's showing, but I have another slide. This is on the top left, it's 5 years old. On the bottom right, it's 20 years old. In the frontal area, there's a little white circle. That is the prefrontal cortex, and you can see on MRI imaging how slowly it develops. So the prefrontal cortex governs judgment, decision-making functions in the brain, and it is the last to develop. There's a whole tremendous body of literature in adolescent behavioral medicine about why young people, 16-year-old boys, like the one I have at home, will do things that just astound you and why they would take those risks. And that's because their brain is the least developed in that area. And it makes them particularly risk-taking behavior and particularly vulnerable to drug abuse. And that's why this is so horrible that this is happening at this time. So what happens to the adolescent brain by nicotine? What is the effect of nicotine on the adolescent brain? So here's just 3 more recent studies, 2009, 2012, 2013. I threw the titles up there. The bottom line is that nicotine can disrupt the growth of the brain circuits that control attention, learning, and susceptibility to addiction. It increases risk of psychiatric disorders, cognitive impairments, and attention deficit. So nicotine is definitely affecting the adolescent growing brain. It makes it more susceptible to addiction. By the way, you guys already have this PowerPoint, so for those of you who want to take pictures or in the back, it's free. Take it, whatever you want. Use it as much as you want. I don't care. I don't feel this is proprietary information, so you guys can have as much access as you'd like. So why is it so hard to have this conversation about how dangerous vaping is? And the problem is that it's very easy to talk about how dangerous cigarettes are, right? So on the slide on the right, I grabbed from my cigarette talk. It's very easy. I show them a cartoon, and I say, which one of you in this room wants to drink battery acid or arsenic or methane, and if I was going to hand you a cup of it, would you drink it? Everyone's going to say no. It's very easy for me to tell them about the over 7,000 chemicals in a cigarette and the 79 different harmful carcinogens in a cigarette. But in vaping and in the e-cigarette community, we have divided, the medical community is divided, as I showed you in one of my earlier slides. As of right now, there is yet to be a patient that's been diagnosed with a disease that has been directly linked to vaping. So people who are pro-vaping would like to say it doesn't cause any diseases. I think that we're a little bit early. Vaping has only been around for 10 years. I'm going to get into about what chemicals there are and what science is showing us so far. In 2015 in Science News, there's the dangers of vaping. They did mice lung studies, and I've been reading that there's more animal studies most recently about vaping and the different chemicals that are in there, and it definitely causes inflammation of the lungs. It does cause some precancerous transformations. So the literature will get there, but right now it's hard to say, it's hard to equate it to cigarette smoking. So here's a slide of the 42 chemicals so far that are identified in e-cigs. The ones that have a check mark are especially harmful to the health, and the ones in red are actually in secondhand e-cigarette smoke. Part of the problem that I've been reading up on is that because there's very little regulation out there at the government level, there's over 460 different makers of e-cigs, and there's over 7,000 different flavors so far. So it's very hard to pin down exactly what's in each one of them because it's so much of a moving target. So a lot of people like to talk about popcorn lung when they talk about e-cigs. It's a big topic. Popcorn lung comes from one of the flavorants. So there are chemicals called flavorants that are in our food that give flavor to them. In the 1970s, one of the flavorants called diacetyl, which gives you a buttery flavor, was in popcorn. So in the popcorn manufacturing companies, they were using a lot of diacetyl, and then all of a sudden a lot of their workers came down with a disease called bronchiolitis obliterans, or BO, and basically it's scarring of the lungs, and then you have progressive respiratory disease, require oxygen, you're on a ventilator the rest of your life, and you die a not so pleasant death. And so they call it popcorn lung, not because there's popcorn-looking stuff inside your lungs. So part of the pro-vaping community will say, well, these flavorants are safe to be in our food, and the amount of particles that are in our vaping is less than the amount in our food. But ingesting it and having a diacetyl go into your stomach acids is completely different than inhaling it into your respiratory epithelium and seeing how it's absorbed and whether or not there's inflammation there, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just going to come our way. Some of the breakdown products like propylene glycol, glycerin move into formaldehyde and acetaldehyde, and those are definitely carcinogenic. So the bottom line is there's definitely carcinogens in there. Don't forget, it also matters about how much exposure, what your genetic susceptibility is to this stuff. So yes, we don't have any data at this point in time. Will we have data in the future? Possibly, probably. So what is my next concern? Well, there's a continuing, increasingly growing body of evidence that e-cigs lead to cigarette use. Here are some titles from an article in 2015, 2016, again, July 2016. E-cigarette use is extremely prevalent on college campuses. Don't think that you're out of the woods just because your kids are in high school. When they get to college, it's extremely prevalent there. It also leads to not only cigarette use, but to marijuana use. October 30th, 2017, here's a longitudinal study out of Canada where they looked in 2013 and 14 and then looked at 2014 and 15. So they asked over the school year of 13-14, I think it was 40,000 kids in Alberta and Edmonton, if I remember correctly, what's your cigarette use, what's your e-cigarette use? And then they went to them a year later. So their conclusion, as you can read, is that e-cigarette use was strongly associated with cigarette smoking behavior, including smoking initiation and follow-up. Here's a study from 2017, December. This was out of Connecticut. It was a lot less. It was 800 kids, and they did a crossover study. So basically they said, and this was again over 2 years, I think it was 13, 14, and 14, 15 as well. I think that those were the years. So basically they said, do you smoke cigarettes or do you use e-cigarettes? And then they followed them up and they said to the kids who smoke cigarettes, do you still smoke cigarettes? Did you stop smoking cigarettes? Do you now use e-cigarettes, etc.? So they're able to see what the translocation is. And interestingly, e-cigarette use was associated with future cigarette use, yet cigarette use was not associated with future e-cigarette use. What I liked was in their discussion, because it is the main gist of my talk, so this is a little bit of foreshadowing. The rising frequency of recent e-cigarette use among youth over time is concerning, especially in light of evidence that e-cigarette use is a significant risk factor for future conventional cigarette use. Here's a screen grab from December 14th of 2017 about marijuana and vaping are more popular than ever. So this comes from University of Michigan, has been hired by the NIH. They do a yearly evaluation of our kids throughout the United States, and they look at drug use, alcohol use, et cetera, et cetera. This was the first year that they decided to not just ask kids about vaping, but actually what they're vaping. So this is the very first year's worth of data. Although I don't have the slide, the previous information out of the NIH, which I think was based in 2015, as they said, and somebody might remember the numbers better than me, either 16 or 18% of high school seniors are vaping. So now the number is 27.8%. So 13.3% of 8th graders, 23.9% of 10th graders, 27.8%. On the right, you could see the breakout. So as the kids get older, you can see the nicotine line goes up. Marijuana and hash oil stays about the same. The just flavoring goes down. And then interestingly, they were smart enough to ask the question, do you even know what's in your vape juice? Which, by the way, I think is probably one of the most major issues here in our communities in Westchester, is that they don't really know what's in their vape juice. So just so you know, I'm going to take a sidebar. The flavorants are put in there to directly market to our kids. And so since my kids are clueless, and I'm assuming everybody else's kids are clueless, they're going to go around saying, don't worry, this is no problem, it just tastes like creme brulee, there's no nicotine in there, and there definitely is nicotine in there, or they don't know that there's nicotine in there. So this is particularly concerning. I would argue that these numbers are very wrong. So I take informal polls of any kid that's 7th grade and older that I come across, whether New Jersey friends, Connecticut, my kids' friends, doesn't really matter. And I ask them just one simple question. I say, what do you think the amount of kids are vaping in your school? What percentage? And every single one of them, I've asked over 10 kids, tell me it's greater than 50%. So there's really no way that it's 27.8%. So January 2nd already of this year, Association of Non-Cigarette Tobacco Product Use. So basically this looked at, I think, 10,000 people over 2013 to 2015. They looked at over 10,000 kids, and basically what this study said was that any non-cigarette tobacco product, so it didn't matter if it was chew or dip or e-cigarettes or hookahs or snooze or whatever you want to use, it doesn't matter, it definitely leads to cigarette smoking. So I think I've made it clear that nicotine affects the brain, it's extremely addictive, and it leads to cigarette smoking. So let me go over what the medical community has to say about e-cigarette and vaping. They believe that there's a certain level of harm reduction, and which I kind of agree with. Harm reduction comes out of the 1990s when Pig Tobacco got busted for hiding or misrepresenting their information about the harmful effects of cigarette smoking, and specifically about nicotine addiction. They talked about harm reduction in advertising low-tar cigarettes, and that you'll get less cancer because it's low tar and isn't a better product because it's harm reduction. So they talk about vaping in terms of harm reduction. So I will tell you that I actually agree with it, whether or not it's a loaded term or not. If I have a patient who is addicted to cigarettes and smokes a pack a day for the last 30 years and has failed all conventional means of getting off of cigarettes, would I want them to use a vape rather than a pack of cigarettes? Absolutely. That does not mean that vaping is safe or advised. So there's a lot of research about whether or not ENDS products are actually a good tool for smoking cessation, and the literature is split right down the middle. There's articles on both sides that says it actually helps and that it doesn't help at all. We do know that there are chemicals in ENDS products that are known to cause disease. We know that there's very little evidence to date of any specific diseases that have been linked to vape use. We know that there's a risk of fire from the electrical elements of the ends. And we do know that ENDS use leads to an increased likelihood of smoking cigarettes or THC. About nicotine, to be particular, the medical community's opinion is that nicotine can be very dangerous if ingested in very high quantities. You can overdose on nicotine. Everyone in this room who's ever smoked a cigarette when they were younger and had a minor indiscretion or a cigar have all felt nicotine overdose in the very first cigarette that they ever had. Any of you who are in this room who have ever taken a puff, you'll remember how you felt a little dizzy and you felt a little bit lightheaded and maybe you felt a little bit nauseous. That was just a very, very early symptom of nicotine overdose. Actually, that leads me to something I should have mentioned earlier. Sorry, my brain's a little all over the place. I use this with my smokers. This is how powerful smoking is, and particularly nicotine is. For anyone in this room who either does smoke or had smoked in their past, you probably can remember that moment in time, that age that you were when you took your first puffs off that cigarette. You knew where you were standing, you knew who you were with, you knew what you were doing, and you knew what was going on. And then I ask those patients to tell me what they got for their birthday that year, or Christmas, or Hanukkah, or whatever, and they can't tell me anything about that year. But they know in depth where they were and what they were doing at that moment in time. That's how addictive and insidious nicotine is. All right, so nicotine is one of the most addictive substances known to mankind. It crosses the placenta. It affects fetal and postnatal development, and it does affect the developing brain. Again, it disrupts the growth of brain circuits in the prefrontal cortex. It can affect attention, learning, susceptibility to addiction, increased use of psychiatric disorders, cognitive impairment, and attention deficit. So nicotine is highly addictive. It can affect your unborn child, and it can affect brain development. So what is an e-cigarette? So an e-cigarette is just made up of a battery and then a heating element, which sometimes is called an atomizer, a cartomizer, or a vaporizer. The heating element is either direct with a wire or with hot air that's being blown through it, and then some kind of liquid or wax substance, if it's marijuana wax, that heats up the oil or the wax, and then you inhale it. And what comes out is vapor. And the tobacco industry and the vaping industry is very concerned that you call it vaping and not smoking. It's not smoke that comes out, it's vape, because smoking is bad. Okay. So, any of you who are in this room whose children are already vaping, their favorite product is Juuls. It's now a verb just like Xeroxing, so it's called Juuling. So this comes off the Juul website. There is the same amount of nicotine, more or less, or the same amount of hits or puffs in one small pod of Juul as per a pack of cigarettes. So the question that is asked to Juul company, are you going to make non-nicotine juice? And they say at this time all our Juul pods include nicotine. Our children probably don't know that fact, and I'm sure they did not read the website and grab it like we did. So I'll have better pictures of the Juuls, plus you have Juuls on the board, plus there are Juuls out front. I strongly urge you to actually touch them, pick them up, and look at them so you know what to look for at home. No tobacco or e-liquid products should ever be considered safe. This is all off their website. Inhalation of e-vapor may aggravate existing respiratory conditions. We recommend that you do not start. So this comes off of the Vaping Daily website. This is their blog, and I at least feel like they have a soul. The very first thing they wrote is, if you do not already smoke, do not start vaping now. I couldn't agree more. They write, eliminate nicotine from your e-liquids. They write, always prefer child-proof bottles for your e-juices. I'm going to show you in a little while that when you're modding, you can buy just the juice in these little bottles that smell or taste like Rice Krispies or creme brulee, and they're made to look like candy, the same little candies that you would go and buy the liquid candy. So there's a tremendous uptick in emergency rooms throughout the United States of America of young children who find it laying around, and they open it up and they drink it, and they have nicotine overdoses and die sometimes from it. Take precautionary measures to ensure battery safety. So Here's some ooh and ah pictures of what can happen. Just a very brief amount about marijuana wax and dabbing. There's a whole culture around it. There's a lot of terminology. I'm now too old to know all the cool words. Dabbing is the most common one. Depending on how the marijuana wax is made, sometimes it can be very dangerous because it's burned down with butane, so the butane oil can stay inside, and clearly inhaling butane oil is not good for anyone. This is a picture of what the marijuana wax looks like. One of the words for it is 710. It's oil backwards, or marijuana oil. The real problem with vaping marijuana, or THC, is how much concentrated it is. It's actually cold concentrate. So regular bud or leaf product, the amount of THC can be as high or up to 20%. In these oils and waxes, it gets as high as 80%. There's new terminology called greening out. We've had young people come to our emergency room who have passed out from vaping marijuana because they are not ready, or their brain is not ready, or the hit is different, and they're just getting too exposed to too much THC and they're passing out. So I'm not so sure how well this slide shows, and I think I'm going to have to kind of repackage this. I circled over here, this comes off the FDA website. So for those who can't see it, I'm going to read it. 2013 to 2014, 81% of youth cited flavors of vaping as the inciting cause as to why they tried vaping. And I can't emphasize this enough, that the flavors are why our kids start. So here's a list on the left of just something I grabbed off the internet, and you can see all the interesting and inciting kind of flavors. You can see on the right what some of the bottles or the e-juices look like, and you can understand why people wouldn't even notice them or see them as candy. Here's another from another website, exotic, savory, fruity. You could see that they're pushing different nicotine strengths. So Juul makes their own stuff, but vape stores, depending on their licensure through the FDA, finally in 2017, right? 2017, are finally regulating it and requiring that if you're going to actually make your own vape oil, you have to have some kind of registration or whatever. And this one made me very hungry, so I decided to include it because breakfast, baked goods, dessert, sweets. I read this and I was like, oh, this is just in the wrong place. And then I said, oh no, this is the 201 Smoke Shop. So what's my opinion? My opinion that the question which everyone will continue to ask, which is whether or not vaping is healthy or safe or not, is actually a distractor question and put there intentionally for everyone to argue about because there's no good answer. I don't care about whether or not vaping is safe or not. I think we'll find out in about 10 or 20 years from now. The question I have to answer is that should we allow our youth to vape? And the answer is clearly no. There is no acceptable reason why any youth or any adolescent should ever touch any vape for any reason. I feel that vapes or e-cigarettes are a tool, and that if you're already addicted to cigarettes and you have failed conventional methods, that you should probably use a vape rather than continue to smoke cigarettes. I believe that the non-nicotine flavored vaping liquid is a gross and obvious gateway product that's aimed at our youth to enter into the nicotine addiction marketplace. So vaping is about addicting your children and creating an industry of billions and billions of dollars. So if greater than 50% of our kids are already vaping now and are clueless, and let's say only 20% of those kids are going to go on to become cigarette smokers, they're going to be fighting a lifetime of battling this addiction that's harder to get off than crack and heroin and alcohol, and I know because I've done it. So my opinion is that the ever-increasing youth vape use with the vaping leads to cigarette use will result in a serious and catastrophic health problem in about 20 to 30 years. I'm glad that I foresee that I will not be practicing in 20 or 30 years because the amount of lung cancer, additional cancers, emphysema, COPD, ventilator patients is going to go dramatically. So what can you guys do? So educate yourselves, have open and honest conversations with your kids, meet with your school leadership and your local government. So I wrote this slide because this comes from some of the Q&As, and you guys already have it here. So again, kudos. Some pictures. This is what Juuls look like. So you can buy a Juul Starter Kit for $50. This is what it looks like in the top left. The little small thing is the USB plug port. It's magnetic. Here's a blow-up picture on the right and into your computer. The long piece in the middle is the battery and the heating element. And then the top four are the different flavors. I want you to know that everybody believes mango is the best flavor. So this is clearly aimed at your children, right? There's no 55-year-old who can't get off cigarettes who's decided, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to start puffing creme brulee flavor. Their competitor in our town was Fix. I just found out from my son today that the fad is already done on Fixes. What was interesting about Fix is it looks exactly the same except for it's diamond shaped instead of rectangular shaped. And the USB plug is a little bit longer. But the reason why this became a fad is because there's at least double the amount of liquid that's in those pods. So for for the cost, they're getting more e-juice. But clearly there's some kind of socialization that have decided that Fix is no longer popular. I want you to know in our towns, everybody's only using Juuls, which means if your kids are telling you that they're vaping with no nicotine, the answer is they are. So hopefully you guys all got this handout, which I left up front, and if not, I know that your school already has access to it. This is a really nice handout by the government that actually has some of the questions your kids will ask and the answers for you. What I would hope that I would offer you guys as a physician, a lot of what I do is behavioral modification, and I'm an agent of change, right? I have a patient who's not eating the right way or not exercising or not taking their diabetes medication, and I have to get them to understand how and why important it is. And it doesn't work so well if I just sit there in the room and say, you need to take your medications the right way, and then you go home and say, screw him, he doesn't know what my life is all about, etc., etc. So I advise you to reframe and use ask, don't tell. I would offer that if you decide to go run into your kid's room, grab their Juul, punish them and tell them that you're never ever allowed to do whatever again and that they can't ever Juul, you're only going to get so far. But if you ask your child questions and ask them, what do they know about vaping? What do they know about the harm? Where are they? And get them to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it to themselves, and have frequent, non-judgmental discussions, you'll be able to move their needle towards understanding that they don't want to do this. The reason why our cigarette levels have come down is because these kids know that they don't want to smoke cigarettes. So to me, your hook is, here's the literature. If you're vaping, you're probably going to be starting to smoke in the future, and is that really what you want to do? So I think that the ask, don't tell technique works, and frequent and open and honest conversations without judgments, a dialogue. Our legislature, our legislative process, I'm not going to get into too much because you guys have someone here who's a better expert and can speak to what you guys are doing here in your town. So I'm going to kind of go through these very fast. I just wanted to leave you with this, which is taken from a regular candy store / vape store here in Westchester. I forgot what town it's from. And what's interesting is if you look at the picture on the right, you could see all the candy and all the products that are there for our children, including the ice cream. And then if you look at the picture on the left, directly above the ice cream are vape products. You can't tell it so well from this picture, but it's put right in front of your kids' faces on purpose. And it looks like it's something fun and interesting, and it is directly marketed at your children to enter them into the nicotine addiction business, because that's what this is. So there's a lot of New York State legislation that has happened. We now can't vape indoors. We can't vape in the same places that you could smoke. And you guys will learn more about this in policy solutions. And And I just wanted to leave you a slide from 2 days ago of your nearest vape shops. Don't forget, you could get this online. Your kids can get a debit card and they could just enter into any website. There's definitely a business or cottage business industry. Kids are selling it. The going price is $50 or more for a vape kit. Kids will just sell the pieces. They lose the pieces and then buy the pieces off of other kids. They're dropped on the buses. They're dropped at parties. They're picked up all over the place. My personal opinion is that we should be educating the parents of the 5th and 6th graders because they start getting exposed in 7th and 8th grade. I want you to know at Northern Westchester, we have a respiratory therapist that comes to everyone's schools and does the smoking cessation bits. And back in November, we pivoted and we spend a quarter of the time on smoking cessation and 3/4 of the time on vaping. And I attended one of the lectures in Pleasantville, and clearly 2 or 3 of the 8th graders had already been vaping. You could just tell from their body language and the fact that they had no poker face. I didn't bring it to their attention, but clearly these kids are already vaping and they're already being exposed by their older siblings, and it's being passed on. So I think if we educate the younger kids' parents, and if they have open and honest conversations to their children, if we pivot quickly in the classroom about teaching this earlier so that they equate the vaping to cigarettes, I think we'll be able to stem the tide, which is in this direction. I'm done.
We do have some time for question and answer with Dr. Stumacher, but before that, Rob Greenstein, our town supervisor.
I think my parents smoked also for the height thing. So thank you. Thank you, United for Youth, for setting up this forum. And thank you to our local hospitals too, for Northern Westchester. And I know that we have Dan Blum here from Phelps Hospital, the CEO. And our hospitals are really leading the charge as well. I mean, that's how I actually learned about the word Juuling. Was going to one of the President's Council's meetings at Northern Westchester, and the kids from the Youth Council came in and talked to us about it. So it's a big problem. I never heard the word Juuling a year ago, probably. I don't remember when I learned it, but it's been within the past year. And so I wanted to talk a few things about what we're doing here in Newcastle. And back in June of last year, we banned smoking in our parks. That includes not just cigarettes, but also vaping products. And so that was the first step we took. When Pleasantville opened their vape shop, our alarm went off and we passed legislation. And you can't just ban vape shops in your town, but what we did is, what most towns do is you basically create distances where they're allowed. And so in our town now, in Newcastle, you can't have a vape shop within 2,000 feet of a school. We have one school in downtown Chappaqua, so it would be very hard to get a vape shop there. You also can't have vape shop within 500 feet of a church or religious institution, a park or a playground or a library. So, in Millwood we have parks in the middle of our town, and we have a church. And then you also can't have a vape shop within 1,000 foot of another. Hopefully we don't have any. But, so we didn't actually ban them, but we did create some parameters that hopefully will prevent them from coming here. And now we're looking into raising the age of tobacco and vape products to purchase here in Newcastle. So what happens is the state law is actually 18 years for tobacco and vape products. Municipalities are allowed to raise that age. Suffolk County, New York City, they've raised the age to 21. Nassau County, 19. Here in Westchester, it's still 18. And Newcastle, it's 18. Newcastle will be 21 soon, and we're going to be encouraging Westchester County to raise it to 21 too. That's for tobacco and vape products. What I learned tonight, which I don't know if towns can regulate this, but I'll look into it, is, with cigarettes have to be sold behind the counter, but as we saw from that slide, vape products do not. So maybe in Newcastle we can regulate that too, I don't know. The last thing I'm going to say is, what's the point of what we're doing really? Kids can buy it online. They can go to Pleasantville and unfortunately have their vape shop, and Mount Kisco certainly has a few vape shops. So we're not going to really stop the kids from vaping, obviously, but I think the goal, what we're trying to do is just show them that this is dangerous. Everything I've mentioned so far, I've mentioned tobacco products and vape products, and they should be mentioned together. And so if we can educate, if the kids realize that we're passing this legislation and we're, combining tobacco and vape products in the same legislation and sentences, then hopefully they realize that it's dangerous. And yes, they could get it online, they could go to another town and buy it, but at least they realize that it's dangerous, and there's a reason why we're regulating it. So that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you.
One of the reasons that I was invited to moderate this evening was because we wanted to make sure we also did highlight some of our concerns around marijuana being used in the e-cigarettes. While we haven't been hearing a lot of stories about our students graduating to traditional cigarette use, we absolutely have had kids talk about using marijuana extracts in the e-cigarettes, and we know that you don't get the traditional smoke and smell. It's much harder to detect. It's very easy for them to conceal. And marijuana and the developing brain are a really bad combination. It impacts prefrontal cortex, it impacts their executive functioning and their judgment, it impacts their memory and their learning, it impacts their motivation. All the things that create a good learner and a student ready, and it really has a huge impact on their future trajectory. So we are concerned about that as well when we're talking about our young people and e-cigarettes. It is something that we're very concerned about and wanted to share that with you. Mr. Rhodes and I are going to be in the lobby with some paraphernalia, but there is an opportunity now if Dr. Stumacher will come up and answer some questions that people might have.
Again, I want to congratulate the efforts that you guys are already doing here. I think it's tremendous. Yes, so it's a great question. The question was with regards to smoking cessation and vaping, what are the alternatives to utilize? So unfortunately, there's been very little forward movement in cessation products. They're really broken down into three types. One is NRT, or nicotine replacement therapy, which I'll come back into in a second. The second one is Chantix, which everyone has heard of. And if it was such a great drug, no one would be smoking anymore. It has a serious side effect profile. It's a pretty decent medication, but not a panacea. And then Wellbutrin, the antidepressant, is one of the unknown side effects is that it decreases your urge to smoke. Nobody really knows the mechanism of action on that. It was just a byproduct of studying the safety of the medication. So it was repackaged from Wellbutrin to Zyban so that the pharmacy company can charge more money for it. So those are those two. And then the third one is NRT, or nicotine replacement, which comes in the form of gum, lozenge, patch, nasal spray, and a inhaler, which it really isn't truly an inhaler. They all have their pros and cons. They're all and there's a lot of literature that shows the more products that you're on at the same time, the better your chances of achieving cessation and maintaining cessation. However, the PIs, the package inserts on these products will tell you that you can't ever use more than one nicotine product at the same time. Probably, just to protect themselves from lawsuits. When I'm doing smoking cessation, depending on the level of nicotine addiction of the person in front of me, because everyone is different and everyone responds differently, I will prescribe a multitude of products, but the second part of it is behavioral modification, which is a big piece of the vaping. So just dealing with the addiction part isn't as good as dealing with both the behavior and the addiction. So human beings are creatures of habit, and there are certain cigarettes that are part of your habit, or you're vaping now, that are part of your habit, and part is just and kind of an in-the-moment need. So everyone knows that waking up first thing in the morning or after meals or going to the bathroom or whatever, these are cigarette smokers' favorite cigarettes. So you need to teach them how to change their behaviors. So what I teach them, it's a fun trick if you guys all want to try it. We go so frequently on autopilot that there are so many things that we do without ourselves really being truly engaged or mindful of what we're doing. What I challenge everyone is the next time you take a shower, try to just go through your shower differently. So if you wash your hair and then you do soap and you do soap on your arm and then your leg, start with soap and do your leg and not your arm. See if you can get through one shower. I have yet to do it. Your brain just goes into a different direction. Same thing with brushing your teeth and everything else. So it's behavior and addiction and the most addictive substance known to mankind. My problem with vaping is because it's easy to sneak, you can do it much more frequently than cigarette smoking, which means the amount of your use and your behavior patterns are going to be much worse than cigarette smoking. That's a great question. So the question is there any theory into why e-cigs would lead to regular cigarettes? I don't think anyone has started to look into the whys yet. They're just trying to combat the vaping is safe strategies with tying in strategies that prove that it's not safe. I read a very, very interesting article on The Verge just yesterday. It gave me an incredible history of all the way in the beginning, all the way to where we are, and tying this into big tobacco and where we are. What we're going through right now is exactly what happened in the early 1990s, and it's just happening again. And so science is trying to catch up with the literature. My personal opinion as to why they would move over to cigarettes could be just where they are in life, socioeconomic costs, growing up, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know why they would switch over to cigarettes, except for maybe that they're hanging out now with people who smoke cigarettes, and so then they go in that direction, but I don't really know. Yes. Yes, you can. You can buy them online, you can buy them in vape shops, and you can buy them in gasoline stations and certain convenience stores. Again, the government only started regulating all the way back in 2017. No. So I don't think any of the big chains are doing it yet, but I wouldn't leave me as the end say. So there are high-level products. Juuls, by the way, are made by a private company in LA. San Francisco. Fix is made by a private company in LA. Big Tobacco's gotten in the game, so they own a whole bunch of other products which our kids don't use. The one that's most frequently advertised that I've seen is Blue. If you've ever seen any advertisements for Blue, that's owned by British American Tobacco, if I remember correctly. So I know CVS, and I applaud them, have decided to remove all tobacco products. I don't see it being in the big stores, but yes, there's many different avenues to get it. And again, to me, the education piece is huge, because no matter how much you want to police this and or regulate this, at the end of the day, based on my own personal experiences of being a teenager, there's going to be a will and a way to get things done. And the best way to handle it is for our children to really understand and believe what's going on. Right now, they're told that it's safe, and right now they'll read anything on the internet that tells them that it's safe, and their friends are telling them that it's safe, and they don't really care too much because they're getting buzzed and they're getting nicotine addicted. Once they're nicotine addicted, their thought process changes. Your behaviors change towards getting that product into you. And so you will convince yourself of other things. So one of the things I do when I have my patients quit smoking, I tell them, listen, congratulations, a year, 2, 3 years from now, something bad is going to happen to you, because you're a human being. You're going to get bad news, and your brain is going to lie to you, and your brain is going to say to you, just have one cigarette, and you'll feel better, and I promise you we won't have another cigarette. And that one cigarette becomes 1 pack a day within 1 week. And I know that this is accurate because all my patients who came back to me all told me that's exactly what happened. Someone died, I got bills, somebody got fired, and boom, they're right back to it. So if they really truly believe that they should not be ingesting nicotine at this point in time, I think you'll be a little bit more successful. Yes?
You talk a little bit about Philip Morris product like Rhodes and how that compares to, because you have two public companies, Philip Morris and outside our borders,
Right.
Altria in the United States, and there's money to be made. Usually it's pretty good that public companies like YouTube and jump on at some point, do your marketing
So that's another good question and over my head. So I do know that those guys are in the business, and I do know that there is work in Washington to start to regulate the marketing of the big tobacco companies for these vape products that are aimed towards our children. That's as much as I know about it. The last I read was that it's a greater than $10 billion industry so far worldwide. I suspect it's probably bigger than that. I apologize, I don't have a better answer for you. I'm really focused on our Westchester youth and their product, which is the Juul. And to be quite honest, I haven't seen any of those other products anywhere. Has anyone else seen them? I've seen ads for Blue a little bit, but I've seen adults vaping. I think I've seen adult once in a blue moon with a blue, you know, they have a little blue tip at the end so that you know it's their product. But I'm sorry, I wish I had a better answer for you.
So is the FDA regulating the Juul product?
No. So they're at the very beginning of what they're doing on a regulatory basis, and right now they're making all the companies who are making any kind of e-juice register with them and try and register whatever products that they have, trying to ensure that you have to be over 18 years old. And that's as far as they've gotten. At the more local, at the state level, it's about what the states are doing and what their, you know, age limits, you know, how New York City, we moved it up to 21, and hopefully in Westchester will be 21. When I met with Nita Lowy, she had told me that the Surgeon General was very interested in reducing the amount of nicotine in regular cigarettes and thought it was a great idea, and I said I think it's a horrible idea. It's just a product, and each person requires whatever they need. And so if you decrease the amount of nicotine in the cigarette, you're just going to give profits to the tobacco companies, because then they'll just smoke twice as much to get the amount of nicotine that that person's brain requires. And so some people come at me with the argument of, well, these products, you could get high nicotine, medium nicotine, low nicotine. Isn't that good? Why don't we just make it all low nicotine? And I like to see this as distractors. Again, I hate to sound like I'm, you know, banging the same drum, but we're talking about the nicotine addiction industry. And it doesn't matter if there's 2 milligrams or 6 milligrams. You're going to get what you get. So it's a great question. The question is since one pod in the Juul is the equivalent of 1 pack of cigarettes, how much are they using? What's their use pattern? And I'll go back to everybody does whatever their brain desires. I couldn't get people who only smoke 3 cigarettes a day off of cigarettes, and then I met people who smoke 3 packs a day, and I say you have to stop, and they drop it like that. Everyone is different. The kids know that 1 pod is the equivalent of 1 pack a day. I don't think they really care in any way, shape, or form. That 1 pack a day means nothing to them because it's safe as far as they're concerned. I want you to know that the costs on this is cheaper than a pack of cigarettes. So it's $17 to $20 to get a 4-pack of 4 pods. So $20, it becomes $5 a pack of cigarettes, or $5 for 1 pod. And then the kids are all buying them and selling them and trading them, doing that kind of stuff. Yes?
I assume we all came here tonight because we didn't know anything about this, and we know it's out there, and we weren't educated. Where's the advertising on TV?
There's very little to none. So Power, the Putnam, Orange, Westchester Regional Against Tobacco, the American Lung Associations, American Thoracic Society, ACCP, everybody's there, everybody's talking about it, but there is no real big campaign dollars to say you guys should not be vaping. And I have a theory, but I can't tell you I know for sure. And my theory is because there's really not the same literature about cigarettes, it's hard to make your campaign look good, number one. And number two, who's paying for it? Who's deciding who's rebranding and who's messaging, who's reframing the question? You know, like I'm reframing the question. Yes, I think vaping is bad. Yes, I agree that the literature isn't so great yet. I don't care. I don't want our kids to be nicotine addicts. So who's making that poster? And where are they putting it? And where are kids seeing it? And where do our kids get exposed to marketing anyway? I don't know that they're as victims to marketing as much as they're victims to the internet, media, and the viral attitude of things. So I was explaining to these guys earlier that I see this as the same thing as, I was always annoyed by these little gadgets that come through our school districts. Every couple of years, the last ones were the fidgets, or the Fitbit things, or the fidget spinners, right? So my kids were, oh, I need $20 for a spinner. I'm like, so you could throw it out in 2 months when it's no longer popular? So this is, to me, just another one of those, except for it has nicotine in it. And it's extremely addictive. And I think everybody's doing it. I don't think it's just cool kids, and I don't think it's not the athletes. I've had parents say to me, I'm sure the athletes aren't doing it because they don't want to affect their ability to perform, and they don't see this as cigarettes, so they aren't concerned about their abilities to perform. Sorry, first you in front and then behind you. Go ahead. Yes, please.
Do they have to be detectors for vapor detectors?
Not that I'm aware of. Not only that, but the vapor odor goes away very fast. As you've heard here earlier, it disappears in a few seconds. Same thing with the marijuana smell. So I've been at parties where I've seen adults who have them, and so I've asked them, because I don't use, and I said, I want you to use it in front of me because I want to be able to smell it, see what happens, and I want to be able to talk intelligently and answer questions that people have for me. And I was shocked at how little odor. So some people will tell you there's no odor. In my opinion, there's a very, very faint THC odor, and it goes away in a few seconds. And that's it. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering where the slides are available online. Are they on the website?
Newcastle United for Youth website whatever will make it available, I promise. And I will send it to your principal, and I'll make sure that your principal will make sure that you guys have access to it as well. Okay? No, so there's no THC in the Juul. They have nicotine and flavor and whatever chemicals they cause to have the flavors, but there are really great videos online about how you can mod the Juul pods to put in THC oil or put in whatever you want. So you'll see outside they have these mods, so you'll see ones that look like big boxes. I didn't include them because I really want to focus on our children, and at least thankfully most of our children aren't modding, although I see in your display your principal had that some of your kids are bringing in these mod boxes. So these mod boxes are very interesting. They're huge batteries, they're huge reservoirs, there are contests on the size of the smoke, so you're hearing that it's smokeless. They make ones that have really great smoke, so you could have smoke ring contests that can give you certain flavors, that give you a bigger hit. There's discussions about the battery and how strong or weak the battery is, which will superheat or give you a quicker hit on the nicotine. And so they call it modding because anyone can go modify not only that kit, but also the oil. And you can even make your own products at home. You can make your own oil kits. So those slides, the one that I said made me really hungry. So that's from a shop in California. You go into the mod shop and you're in the mood for, a side bowl. So you say, give me a side bowl flavor. And they know how to mod it to make it work for you. I think it's too early. I don't think there's any literature on it. I will tell you that it can affect the respiratory tract, so I can't tell you there's any literature, but if your child is asthmatic or has exercise-induced asthma, and then they're going to bring an irritant into their lungs, and then they're going to go perform, or their chances of having bronchoconstriction, etc., I can't see how they can't. But that's the problem with where we are, is the interesting combination of the viral speed with which this is going on, that nicotine is the most addictive substance we have to mankind, and the dearth of robust literature. It's a perfect tsunami. Perfect storm, sorry. So they can order online, and they can get it from friends, and they get it from the same places that they would get non-THC oil. That's what I've been told as of last. I don't know where online or how online. I've asked adults how they get it. As THC moves towards being legalized, it'll become easier and easier to get. My concern is if they're being made with butane and the kids are inhaling the butane, how nasty that can be. And again, I don't want to be lopsided. If I have a patient who's got really bad bone pain from metastatic cancer, and THC works for them as a good pain reliever, and vaping medical marijuana that's been licensed and processed the right way with a approved device, I'm grateful that I have that tool in my armamentarium for my patients. So I don't think this is all horrible. I just don't think our kids should be doing it.
Are there ways to screen for nicotine like you would for those?
Yeah, so you can check cocaine levels, and it's complicated. There's not many labs that do it, so you're not going to be able to really use it as a tool. Plus, there's also legal ramifications and legal actions of how much can you drug test or investigate like that. But yes, you can.
Does secondhand vaping affect others? Is it like secondhand smoke?
Yes. So there are chemicals that have been documented in the bloodstreams of other people from secondhand vape. I don't know how dangerous that is. I don't like to spread fear. I'm not a fear monger. I don't love that concept of things. I hope I'm not spreading fear here. What I'm trying to spread is information, facts, and ways to engage our children to understand the reality of what they have rather than the misinformation. I've been asked this many times because parents are very concerned that their children are going to bathrooms and it reeks like vape all day long, and can their kids go into the bathroom? Their kids can't even go to the bathroom anymore. And I wouldn't want my children going into the bathroom all the time. So if my kids went into a bathroom where other kids were vaping and it was once in a blue moon, I wouldn't go bonkers about it. But if it was an everyday occurrence all year long, I would want that to stop. All right. I want to thank you guys all again. I'm available. Come back. Any questions?